let's talk about method of procedure. So just to be clear, method of procedure exists in other jurisdictions. There are jurisdictions outside the US, just so you know, right? And they're called method statements in other parts of the world. So in the Middle East, the UK, they're called method statements. And in the UK, they are actually sort of legal documents tied to health and safety legislation. So method of procedure, I think they're very important. What do you think?
Well, whenever we're talking about method of procedure here, it's kind of like, how do you tab something, or how do you, how are we going to move through testing this, or how did you install it? I mean, I've never really heard of a method of procedure for what you just said about more of safety, but I think that's obviously a great way to put it too. All very important, but at the same exact time, it's a sequencing of how things should happen, methods of how things should take place, of how safety and basically how equipment operation should take place. And I personally think that, we're in the world of documentation and verification. So all we care about is, where is it written down? Was it approved? Who's looked at it? Has it been signed off? I mean, that's what we're really doing. We're QA/QCing, risk mitigation. We are, we're the owner's rep. We're the advocate. We're the one who's saying, show me the money.
Show me the money. I like that. So is there a commissioning plan, not MOP?
Well, see, the interesting, whenever we're putting a commissioning plan together and we have all these different areas, and we put in milestones, and we're looking at the pieces of it, but at the same time, it's a good point where it's sort of inferred, but let's talk about TAB, test and balance, for instance, right? So you'll say TAB will occur here, here, and here. It'll do XYZ according to the specs, right? But at the same time, it's just like, unless you asked, or if it was actually in like the RFP or the RFQ or whatever like that, so how you selected them, it'd be like, this is how they're going to take the situation and how they're going to TAB it. Every single method of procedure, because it always does come up no matter what, because you're like, oh, TAB is going to be on site next week, and so it's like a training agenda, at the end, but it's also a method of procedure, before you begin. So there is no question of what is going to happen as soon as so-and-so shows up, right? And for me, I believe that the best subs that I've ever worked with are the ones, when we bring this up, they go, no problem. Thank you for asking me that. I am happy to provide that. And then you all go back and forth as a team, and then you're like, woo, right? And you get something done. Awesome. Because now you're proceeding together. But when you do have some folks that are like, why do you want me to write this down? What are you questioning? It automatically, it's like red flag to me. And because we're supposed to be a commissioning team, it's not supposed to be just basically the commissioning army of one or two or whatever, you know what I mean? It should be a team, and we should always be talking about things, because remember, just like before we talked about specs, where it's like, that is a written doctrine. How you do something in the field is very close, but how you work together in the field and on site and in the crunch, y'all got to come up with like, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And if something has to change, automatically it's like, okay, let's get an RFI. Let's get the EOR on the call. Let's get the owner on the call. So those RFIs, from the method of procedures, they need to happen in 3 minutes, not 3 days or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Because that's how things get done as a team. And if they don't, welcome to the suck, and you will be in major problems.
That's a Marine
down the road.
I
quoted some movie, I can't remember, but I loved it.
Yeah. That's interesting, because really what you're saying is it's a pre-flight check. It's a way of getting everyone on the same page and making sure we're good to go, right?
Because the worst thing is when you actually do something that takes a day or 2 or 3 or whatever, and then you come back 2 or 3 weeks later, you're like, what about the air vents? Did you bleed them? And you're like, that's going to affect the entire tab. You know what I mean? It's like, and then you're like, we might have to do this over again. You're like, first question, well, who's going to pay for that? It wasn't in the specs.
Yeah, that's it. That gets you better spec. How many times have I heard that? It's not in the spec. I wish I had $1 for every time someone said that to me.
Oh, I would buy a boat. I would call the boat would be called specs.
So that's really interesting though. So in the US, do they have to be signed off officially and like on the system, like, with an A or a B approval?
it's a document that everybody reviews, and
Yeah.
if you actually make it part of what you're doing, yeah. I don't know if there's officially down at the bottom where it's just like, yeah, we signed off, but it's a vetted document. It's an approved document that everybody should. It's almost like, to me, honestly, it should be like part of a submittal. It should be
You
like,
need technical people who understand,
yeah,
read it, right? Which is naturally the commissioning people.
because not all the time
Yeah.
so listen, in the field, not everything works as it says on paper. I mean, sometimes you might not have the perfect heat exchange. You might not have that 2.4 gallons per ton. You might have a 1.78. You're like, what? You're like, where? You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, my barrel, where did the temperatures go? And you got to figure this out, because you have to be within the range, and everybody's got to agree on it. Because remember, when you turn something over to the owner, I mean, it's got to work according to the intent, but it's got to work better than just, intent. You know what I mean? Like, you actually have to walk away going, we've made that work. We've done our job. We are a team, right? We're leaving something good. We know that, it's not going to happen again this quickly, or when there is a mistake or a fault. It's just like, you don't want to, like, the worst thing is signing off on something on Monday, and then you're like, woo, we did it. And then basically 2 weeks later, you're like, oh, the damn thing went down. You're like,
yeah,
how?
That's interesting. So for our international audience, right? So method of procedure is, I think, the US version of a method statement. But so in the UK, they call it a RAM, a risk assessment method statement. So the idea is you assess the risks, address them, you talk about means and methods, and everyone signs off it, and then you go forward. The idea is you've got competent people who know what they're doing. Everyone's agreed what's going on. It should, being a key word, go forward, and there will be things that happen. But generally, it's a risk mitigation issue, right? It's a alignment issue.
Well, it could also, so for folks that never work in tabs, let's say you have architects on here, it could also be like how you're going to apply waterproofing for below grade or above grade. How basically how one layer is going to go on to the next. Oh, you're going to look at the shop drawings. You're going to look at basically the architectural drawings. You can say, oh, it's just the assemblages. It never works like that, because things don't stick to the walls like you think spaghetti will.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Everything has its own little way. As long as you're as close as you can to how it should be, and you talk over it, you're like, well, what about this condition that we didn't think about? You have to talk through things, and nothing is black and white in a construction site. Let's be real. Okay. And you're out there all doing your best together. Remember, together.
One team, one dream.
Exactly. Like, teamwork makes the dream work, baby. So, but that's the thing about it, is you got to make it work together. And there is going to be little headbutting sometimes. But remember, at the end of the day, it's just like, you're all friends. You're all going to go out and basically have some whiskey later, if you don't, root beer, whatever. But it's just, you're all supposed to be on the same team. And I think I've said this 1,000 times, and I say it every single time on a job site, and I mean it. Like, find a way to make it work together.
Yeah. So just to wrap that up, I think these are quite important evidentiary documents. So every project is also a document management project, and also an archival project, right? So I recommend everybody, the risk assessment method statements or the method of procedures need to be part of the evidentiary documentation that is handed over at the end of the job, with the tab reports, the commission reports, the startup reports, the installation test reports. They've all got to be there. In theory, if you click on, I know, if it's, let's say it's an electronic documentation handover, as a client, I should be able to click on, say, chill water system number 4, and get everything from the installation test sheets to the MOP to the startup to the commissioning, the tab, the final handover, the IST, everything for that thing should be in there.
What you just said is completely true. And the last thing I tell people, I'm like, you don't build buildings brick and mortar. Like, yeah, we do it. No, you build them with basically 1 million pages of paper.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So
true. That is so true, Ed. Yeah, because every job is a document tsunami, right?
Well, at the end of the job, 1 year later, 2 years later, all you hear is, where's the as-built? Where's the documentation? Where's this? Where's that? And then you're over here going, and some of us are like, I gave it to you. It's there. And then you're kind of like, where? I mean, that the worst, the last thing we're really going to say here is the worst thing that we ever face as commissioning or auditors or whatever like that is when we come onto a new job or no job, we're like, Like, once again, show me the money, show me the document. You're like,
All right.
you're done.
Yeah, agreed. Okay.